The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m. The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
Thank you for having me, Drew. Yep, you got it.
Or most people who know me know my father coached soccer at the prep for over 50 years. So I think Reza, you never had my. Were you a freshman when my father was in his last year?
Yeah, that was the year Coach Coyle was the assistant. Playoff game at LaSalle. I'm pretty sure it was my
Gotcha.
freshman.
Okay, so you were part of my dad's program, but never you
Yep,
never
and
never on the team unless you
never
unless you started as a freshman, which not many people do.
not happened.
Yeah.
So, and I met Reza last year on the campaign trail, on my campaign trail for city council. I was at one of the polling stations in I think northeast Philadelphia. I don't even remember. There's like
It was,
1,600.
yeah.
Yeah, 1,600 polling stations. And I was actually hanging out for like an hour with Ern Santamore's brother. We were just kind of goofing around because when you work the polls as a candidate, 90% of the time you're just sitting there because people aren't walking in. You know, you have your rushes in the morning, then the rushes at lunch, and then at night. But so we were just hanging out. It was probably like I forget 2 or 3 o'clock, and we were hanging out. And then there was some sort of issue, and Reza can go into it. I forget what it was, and you might not even remember Reza. There's some sort of
remember
issue.
kind of well. It was just basically so it was at Baldy High School, which
Okay.
is up Bustleton, Northeast, which is where I'm from. I live down the street from there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my dad had just picked me up from wherever I was helping in Fox Chase, I think it was that day, at the poll, and then there was some like anti Aaron Santamore sign that we heard about from some people in the campaign, and I was like, hey, I can swing by. I live right near it just to see what's happening.
Yeah.
Did we saw it was just I forget what it had to do with honestly, but there was something targeting Aaron, and I just wanted to make sure what was going on. And
Gotcha.
then we
Yeah, I do remember that sign, and I forget what it was too. It will come to me, but so I met Reza, and I was very impressed. I mean, I would never have known he was a high school senior. I assumed he was. Nah, he looks young. I mean, if you ever look at Reza,
facial hair.
everyone looks young compared to me. I'm 48. Leslie is a few years younger than me, right? I believe.
Oh.
Leslie and I are about the same age. So,
Yeah.
but Reza really impressed me. I mean, I honestly thought he was a college grad. He graduated from college already and was working full time for Ern's campaign. I didn't realize that he was a high school student. So, that's a compliment to you, Reza. I mean, I really was impressed with how you handled the situation. And, after the campaign, at one point, Reza reached out to me because, he talked to me and he didn't realize he probably knew who I was, but meaning running for city council as a Republican, but he didn't realize my connection with the prep. And then afterwards, so he reached out to me and we kind of communicated through Facebook. So Reza, you're a Democrat. I think you were in part of the Young Democrats at the prep. I assume. What kind of drew you originally to politics? and the Democratic Party in particular. I'm a Republican. Leslie's a Democrat. I'm trying to
Yeah.
switch her over to Republican, but I don't know. We'll see. So, what drew you to politics at such a young age? Because it is somewhat unique. You see some young people getting involved in politics, but not to the level that you had gotten involved in at such a young age. What kind of drew you to politics?
So I was a pretty quiet kid going into the prep, to be completely honest. And I think nowadays, I'm pretty outspoken about what
Yes,
I
you
believe
are.
in. But that all, it's due to the prep and honestly the election in 2016.
Mm.
Um, and whatever political side you fall on, there's a bunch of nuanced debates that can happen within that election, right? But as you know, I'm a practicing Muslim. You can kind of see the Pakistan flag in the back there.
Mhm.
And there was certain rhetoric towards my family that we had faced during the campaign.
Okay.
And it was just like my parents are a bit older. I'm the only kid, and I kind of told myself that like I need to know what's going on so I can understand how to protect my family and I the best. Um, so I go into freshman year. I was like 5'1". I didn't say a word. Like I was quiet the whole time. But after the election, we realized at the prep there was no Democrats club,
Mhm.
Wow.
and it's just reflective of the student body. And it just like the student body is majority conservative. It just is what it is, right? We've done a poll to figure that out,
Interesting.
but there was never a Democrats club. So spring of 2016 is when it was first founded, and I think being like a founding member of that club really gave me the next 3 years after that to just get more and more involved and more outspoken and just learning as much as I could.
No, that's interesting, and because I think there was a Young Democrats Club when I was there, because I thought I was part of it. I was a Democrat my entire life up until a couple of years
Yeah.
ago. So I thought it would, and I'll be honest. I think when I went to the prep, now this is a long time
It
ago.
might have just fallen off over time.
Yeah. Well, I actually think it was more. How do you define liberal and conservative? I think there were a lot more. I would have think the majority of the people there, honestly, were Democrats. There was probably back then a lot more kids from the city who went to the prep. I know that demographic has changed a bit. But no, it actually surprises me that the Democrats, or I should say the Republicans and slash conservatives, outnumber the Democrats. I think that was probably the opposite of the case when I went to the prep.
So
Yeah.
I think I had a big part in the Hawkeye, the school newspaper.
Yep, sure.
That was my main extracurricular, and so we ran a poll towards the end of the year. And I'd have to dig through my Google Sheets to find the raw data, but the faculty definitely leaned left. But the student body the majority identified on the right.
Oh, interesting.
I just want to. This is interesting conversation, Drew, because I think any religion that you practice in this country, with the exception of Christianity, seems to be under attack, especially of the Muslim faith. I mean, this is an issue. This has been an ongoing issue. I don't know if it has been exacerbated under the Trump administration. I'm not going to go there. You can speak to that more. I want to be careful in saying that as a fact. But I know that the Muslim faith and religion has been under fire. What is do you feel that sentiment? Do you feel that given the political climate that we're living in today, and what's happening in this country, across this country, what do you feel about that? What's your feel in regards to that?
Yeah, so that's what, like I said earlier, that's what got me involved. And there were some instances at the prep that obviously aren't indicative of the institution as a whole or the student body as a whole that were like pretty when it comes to like Islamophobia and stuff like that. Like I was at a Christian school. I'm a bit of an outlier. The last demographics report I read of the school had 2 Muslim kids out of the 4 grades. So, and I don't know who the other one was. But like when I walked in after the 2016 election, there were kids chanting Trump at me, and I was like, okay, like why would you be chanting that at me, but not and I don't know what their motives are. I don't know what their political beliefs are. Like, but it was weird that it was only me getting targeted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so stuff like that happened. I brought up earlier, I'm from the Northeast. I'm from Bustleton, and I think I represent a part of the Northeast that isn't always talked about, which is that heavy immigrant population.
Yeah.
Um, and my parents are both born and raised in Pakistan. They ended up immigrating here eventually later in life for education or stuff like that. And there's a bit of a standoff in the Northeast at times, and it's just like when I see, and I don't want to get too much into this, but if you guys remember the, I think it's called the Plain View Project, which it was reviewing law enforcement social media posts, and Philadelphia had it was the largest demotions of Philadelphia police officers. 72 went on desk duty because there were a lot of people in law enforcement found making certain posts that could have been classified as racist, misogynist, Islamophobic, whatever. Um, the reason why I bring this up is because the stuff that Inquirer quoted was people like saying like death to Islam.
Yeah.
And these are the people that took an oath to protect people like my parents and I, right? So it's just like you kind of feel at odds with your country sometimes with how much Islam is villainized. Um, and it's such a nuanced topic that I have a really good friend who wrote her honors thesis at NYU about this entire topic about Muslim Americans and conflicting identities.
Yeah.
So you definitely feel a bit of animosity. And there's definitely some things that you feel out of place at times and all of that. I'm on the side that Islam is inherently compatible with democracy, like or a representative democracy like the United States. If you ever stumble across the 2020 prep yearbook, I quote the founder of Pakistan, who talks about how democracy is in the blood of Muslims. It's how a religion was formed. If you study how Prophet Muhammad rose to power and what he did,
Right.
so long tangent. Basically, there's definitely animosity in the country that you feel, but end all be all, I feel like Islam is definitely compatible with the United States.
Right. Well, let me just say two things. One, I would say that you guys live by the five pillars of faith in the Muslim religion, which is testimony of your faith. You talk about prayer. You talk about giving, charitable giving, fasting. You do the pilgrimage. So that's part of your faith, right? That is the Muslim faith that you live by. The second question that I have for you is: do you feel that white supremacy is a threat to the Muslim religion? And I just want to say this: the way that the Muslim religion is practiced in the United States by Muslim Americans seems to be a little different than the way the Muslim religion is practiced in a foreign country, whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's in the Middle East. And oftentimes what we get fed through TV or what we read is sometimes put you in a very, or the Muslim religion, if you will, in a very negative light as to the way that religion is practiced to justify certain behaviors that can be counterintuitive, if you will, to the way democracy is practiced here in the United States. You follow me?
Yes. So I'll start at the beginning. White supremacy is a threat to Muslims. I don't have exact studies on hand, so I don't want to start throwing out numbers that I can't verify. But my understanding is U.S. agencies have identified white supremacy and domestic terrorism to be one of the leading, if not the most important threats to our country currently within like a terrorism niche, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you want to look at white supremacy as a threat to Islam specifically, I'm not sure if you guys remember the New Zealand shooting, but in New Zealand, someone had a manifesto that was riddled with white supremacy, and they published it and then walked into a mosque and opened fire. I don't remember when this happened. It feels like so long ago, but it really is still pretty recent.
Yeah.
But that's something that happened in a country that considered to be, at least when it comes to gun violence, a lot more developed than us, right?
Yes.
Definitely feel like it's a threat. Um, I don't I don't believe that. I think when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about violence in this country, I think our like Black America
Mm-hmm.
is definitely the biggest victims we've seen just in America because of the systemic legacy of their oppression, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
compared to, I mean, you can draw Islam with the people that were brought over as slaves that were originally Muslim, but Muslim immigrants like myself have never been systemically oppressed. We're not, we weren't enslaved. There wasn't segregation. There wasn't Jim Crow. So we face our own stuff that we have to go through. But I always want to make clear the distinction between stuff you face when you get here now versus systemic oppression that's lasted generations and then therefore affected generational wealth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Second, talking about Islam practice in other countries and Muslims placed in a negative light. Um, I think I've never been a fan of theocracy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I'm a follower of Islam, but I would be considered a very progressive Muslim, and my denomination is considered as such.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I like to compare it sometimes to Reform Judaism. It's not an exact science. I also like to compare my denomination of Islam to the Jesuits. So there's a couple links there that I try to make because I went to a Jewish preschool. I went to St. Joe's Prep, so I try to tie those things in to make it a little easier to understand.
Well, won't you be considered an infidel if you do practice outside of the norm of the Muslim religion? And you know what they consider in the Middle East an infidel if you're not practicing according to what they according to the way they practice their religion.
So yeah, I'll get into the theocracy stuff then because countries in the Middle East that have like a hijab mandate, that's
Yeah,
a you
the
have to wear,
hitman job. Yep, yep.
um, that is against Islam. Like there's nowhere in the Quran that says you have to wear the hijab. There's not a single verse.
Okay.
Um, a lot of times we see like in Islam it asks you to dress modestly. That's true. Um, a verse that's commonly forgotten is that the first onus is on the man, not the woman, to lower their gaze and to not objectify people. That's the first onus. The second onus is then to dress modestly for both women and men. Um, Nothing said that you have to like the hijab itself is something that developed over time and that people wear, and it's considered to be a sign that you're closer in your relationship to Allah. And it's a good thing to wear if you're capable of doing it, but it's not. It's never been mandatory. Um, and there's some very strict Orthodox Muslims that will adhere to that belief, but it's not in the Quran per se.
Right.
So countries that are turning this religious idea or religious custom into law, one, I don't believe in theocracy no matter what religion I practice because I
Right.
believe countries should be secular.
Right.
But two, it's not even Islamic. It's not even like some of these ideas don't fall fit to what the religion originally stood for.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when Prophet Muhammad was first when he was first preaching his message and what he was learning, um, he was chased out of his original city by the leaders right there, by the current leaders there, because his beliefs were challenging economic status and therefore more egalitarian. Um, he wanted to change the trading habits of certain cities, and he said any revolution or any change or social or religious change has to benefit all the people.
Mm-hmm.
But there were already societal systems at play where poor people were being more marginalized and more oppressed.
Yeah.
So the leaders of that town chased him out. So Islam at its very roots is a revolutionary religion that's for helping oppressed people and marginalized people and not for doing the opposite.
Well, let me ask you this question, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here for a minute.
Yeah.
Where is the woman's role in the Muslim religion? Because oftentimes, again, and this is part of the concerns, not mine, but in general, that women are marginalized within the Muslim religion, that women are not treated fairly within the Muslim religion, where there's a lot of oppression, There's mental, emotional, and physical abuse of women in the Muslim religion. What would you say to the people that have that view? How would you debunk that fallacy?
So there's two things I like to always bring up, but also it's important to note that like I am a guy, I can't speak fully to this. I understand some of the scripture, but I don't know what it's like to have faced it or have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf or Muslim women's behalf. This is just my understanding of it. Um, One thing I like to tell people is that my mother um, actually helps lead prayers. Like in my denomination of Islam, um, there's specific holidays or specific um, reoccurring. We'll call them holidays for it's not an exact science, but just for comparison
Hmm.
that happen, and there's special prayers that happen on those set holidays. Um, One of them happens every 3 months, and whenever these holidays happen, we have different people lead the congregation in prayer. I forget how young I was, but like 3 or 4 years ago, my mom held that role for 3, 4 years. Um, and it's people are like, wait, a woman led the congregational prayer, and it's like Islam doesn't teach X, Y, and Z, whatever. Um, but Islam, so there's stuff like that that's happening in at least my denomination of Islam. Um, but if we want to look at my denomination isn't very common. It's the second largest of Shia Islam. But I think one thing in the Quran that talks about how originally in the faith, like all religions is being manipulated by theocracies in the Middle East to oppress people.
Mm-hmm.
That I won't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I There's no denying that, right?
Right. Right.
But Islam at its inherent roots is egalitarian. And one thing I'll bring up is how Islam gave women the right to get a divorce whenever. Um, the Quran mandates that if a woman says something 3 times, they can leave. They can have a divorce. And that was something that was very, very rare at the time. And that was only a man's right before that scripture. Um, and obviously, that's not an, and oh, yeah, just because women could divorce a husband when they wanted to, they now have right. Like, obviously not. There's issues today with the treatment of women and the oppression of women and a patriarchal past in society and still today, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of things in Islam at its roots, and I'm not a religious scholar. I can't speak to this perfectly, but Prophet Muhammad being persecuted on egalitarian beliefs, such as the scripture saying that women have the right to leave whenever they want, and they're also entitled to the money in the household, in the family. That was something so revolutionary that he was literally chased out of his city and had to flee for his life.
Right.
So there's stuff like that that isn't really talked about that I think is important.
Gotcha.
But it also definitely is important to address that there are atrocities happening in the world in the name of the religion.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that it's not interpreting the religion anywhere close to correctly, but they exist, and there's stuff we need to address and do the best to fix.
Sure. So going back, I want to go back quickly to you had talked about when Trump won that some prep guys were chanting something obviously regarding Trump. That's unfortunate, and I hope it's because maybe you were just outspoken and you were the one who brought back the young Democrats.
It was before that. That was the issue.
That was
but
before that. Okay, so
it was like tiny freshman me hadn't said a word. Just that's what I'm getting. Yeah.
well, number one, I apologize, and I hope
No,
that,
no worries.
and I hope
No.
that wasn't the case. They certainly weren't acting as men for others. If that's what if in their heart they were doing it because you were a Muslim. So you had said these issues came up during a couple issues came up during the 2016 campaign. A lot of people, President Trump is a divisive figure. Some people love him, some people hate him. I have been very critical of him in many areas. He has been, and it goes to the debate, and I criticized him for his answer at the debate when he was asked to condemn white supremacy, and many people did not like his answer, including myself. I mean, it was a layup answer. He should have said, "I condemn all white supremacy. I condemn all xenophobia, all anti-Semitic groups, all hate groups." Is what he should have said. That's not what he said. Now, I personally don't think the president is a racist. My biggest problem with him when it comes to racism is that I don't think he condemns it. I think, and some of the groups, like the Proud Boys, whether they're a hate group or not, I think they are. Some people argue they're not. It is odd to me that they're called a white supremacist group, but have people of color as part of their group. So I'm confused about the Proud Boys, but I'll err on the side of caution, and I steer away from them when I'm at an event and they come walking by. But so my point is, I feel the president has emboldened some groups. I mean, the Proud Boys, and the fact that they felt, emboldened to say, we're standing by for you, Mr. President, is a big problem. Do you think, Reza, in your experience, since 2016, it sounded like there was an issue prior to Trump even becoming president, do you feel like it's gotten worse? Do you feel like, as a Muslim, that you are experiencing more racism or more white supremacy toward you and toward others in the Muslim religion?
So yes.
Okay.
I do wish there were I remember reading a lot of studies about this specific stuff because I was very curious, and like I brought up earlier, my friend did her thesis research on this. But I don't want to say the numbers because I don't have them backed up, but I've read research on how hate crimes spiked during the administration, or whether it be, there was a very interesting piece talking about places where he held campaign rallies and increases in like crime and increases in hate crimes specifically in those areas. But those claims, consider them unfounded right now because they don't have the evidence. But just in general, from a gut feeling, I'm a bit like, you're just a little more on edge. Like, I'm worried about my parents. Because like I said, they're a bit older and I'm the only kid. So like, I'm a bit worried when my mom goes for a walk, or it's just those two walking around. Like, we've had people say stuff. I've had plenty of people say stuff on the soccer field. I'm kind of just used to it at this point, as bad as that sounds. But I definitely feel I lean on the side of the president has said very, very racist things. I understand people not categorizing him as a racist because of what comes with that term and whether he does it knowingly. For as much as I'm against the guy, I honestly think he's, like, first and foremost, I think he's the type of like old grandfather racist. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but
It's people call it Archie Bunker.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's an Archie Bunker racist.
Yeah.
They say Archie Bunker was a racist, but he didn't know he was a racist.
He didn't know.
You might be too young for that comparison, Reza.
but I think what you said at the end is exactly, like, I think he in his brain, and I don't want to really go at the president. I don't think that's the best thing for me to do here, but he might think he's not genuinely, but I would definitely consider his comments towards specific groups and specific congresswomen, Ilhan Omar, to go back to her country, like, that's textbook to me. But yeah, if I had to like take like a gut feeling, I'm definitely a bit more worried. I've definitely had more incidences in these last 4 years. Then again, I've also been ages 16, 15 to 19 during this. So I don't know how much I remember from grade school. Like, I'll remember some incidences with Islamophobia in grade school, but it also just might be I don't remember as much because I was younger, right? And everyone was younger, so that kind of stuff wasn't happening. But overall, talking to my parents, talking to my friends, there's definitely been a justification for hate like this, or this type of rhetoric, because of who was elected as president, at least in my opinion.
Okay. No.
Well, and I can say, Drew, I think that the president has revolutionized a lot of things here in this country, especially with the Muslim group. Prior to 2016, and I'm a Democrat, and Drew know this, but I'm also a moderate in my thinking and my political ideology. Prior to 2016, you saw very few Muslims part of the Democratic Party. In fact, didn't have any major role within the Democratic Party nationally, okay? After Donald Trump, 2016, that he got elected, it seems to me that the Muslim family became an asset to the Democratic Party versus a liability. Do you feel that's the case now?
Yeah, I think, and I'm a bit more progressive. I'm pretty, I I'll tone it like, but just in general, I think there's blame on both parties for Islamophobia post 2001, but definitely the more welcoming party has been the Democratic Party, which is where I identify today. And I think your analysis is spot on. I never even looked at it that way, but yeah, you saw a rise in people, whether they be more progressive candidates in general or just Muslim candidates, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, these people running for office that we have never really seen before at such a high level, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think the argument is to be made there, and I think it draws a parallel to my political journey, even though mine's at a high school political club level and theirs is at Congress, right? But with what happened in 2016, I felt a need to get involved, and I tried my best to do so, and I think the same could be said about those congresswomen for sure.
Yeah.
So we're about halfway through. Why
Yes.
why don't we take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Usula Radio and the Republican Zone.
I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. And even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. I have a mentor, Maria, and she convinced me to continue my education. Just never judges. She's a true role model.
From the depths of my heart, I thank you, Maria, for being a friend and a beautiful person. No one receives a diploma alone, and I'm honored to share this moment with you. Thank you.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Radio and the Republican Zone. I'm your host, Drew Murray, with my co-host, Leslie Costa, and my friend and guest, Reza Ali. So when we took a break, we were talking about, and it's interesting because I kind of have a different take of the Democratic Party, obviously, because I left it. But I still like Democrats. I'm a moderate as well. I was always a conservative Democrat. Now I'm a liberal Republican. But it's interesting how you said the Democratic Party. You know, Leslie brought up it, but Reza, you kind of confirmed it, that they were more welcoming of the Muslim community. Because I will say, you know, the reason I left the Democratic Party, you know, the statement I always say is, I didn't leave the party left me, because it is a different party, and which is fine. You know, it depends on where you kind of fall on the liberal conservative spectrum. The party went a little bit left to me, but the reason the kind of the tipping point for me was I'm pro-life, and the party is not welcoming to people who are pro-life. In fact, Tom Perez, who was the head of the Democratic National Committee, came out and said, and this is kind of what the day I literally became a Republican was, he said, we don't want you, basically. I forget the exact wording, but it said if you are not pro-choice, you are not part of the Democratic Party. And a lot of people came out and went against him, including Bernie Sanders. One of the largest pro-choice advocates said you were wrong in saying that, but he doubled down. He came back and said, no, I said what I said. So I left the party. So totally, completely different issues. And I'm not comparing the two. I'm just more looking at the, how I felt unwelcome in the Democratic Party, kind of probably about the same time as, maybe the Muslim community was feeling more welcome. So, not necessarily even a question, but that was my take. That's why I became a Republican. Where the tipping point, I should say, was when they said you're no longer welcome in the party. And the interesting thing is, obviously, Reza, you went to the prep. I went to the prep. I am Catholic. My mom was a pull the lever Democrat. My dad is still a Democrat, although I think he probably votes mostly Republican now. Most Democrats were Catholics were always Democrats growing up. That's my, I don't know what your feeling
Yeah.
is, Leslie, but we were all Democrats.
Yeah,
You know, we
yeah.
were middle class.
Died hard
You know,
Democrats.
I'm an Irish Catholic. You're Latino Catholic, but so, and I am very curious on how many people left the party at that point, because just because you're Catholic doesn't mean you're pro-life. I kind of think you have to be, but that's a totally different story. But there are pro-life Catholics who were Democrats, and I'm always curious on how many people left, because the party said we don't want you anymore.
Yeah. Well, the party, I don't know, sometimes view different groups, whether it being a liability or an asset to them. But here, I have another question, or an observation, if you will. You know that the DNC this year, given the 4 years of the rhetoric of Donald Trump against the Muslims or anything that doesn't represent what he stands for or what he looks like. Let's just put that out there. The DNC this year, given the 4 years of the rhetoric against the Muslim community, they did not have on the main stage at all any, I didn't see any Muslims or a voice presented on the main stage for the Democrats. And that's a very interesting observation, given the 4 years of this constant the Muslim faith being bombarded by this president and by the rhetoric. And that's an observation that I'm making, and I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, what do you think, Ryan? Did that jump out at you watching the convention?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I wanted to make sure that when I started talking about how the Democrat Party was more welcoming, I think it was in a binary is what I wanted to set it as.
Correct.
I mean, compared to the Republican Party, with how Islamophobia was treated or whatever, the Democratic Party was more welcoming. But that's not to clear them of, neither political party was a fan of us post 2001, all right? The authorization for use of military force that is still used today to bomb the Middle East was passed post 9/11 on September 12th. And it said any ally of Al Qaeda or whatever, we will go after or whatever, which is like, yeah, let's go after the terrorists. But obviously, as both of you, I think, would agree that we didn't exactly do that. We ended up in a bunch of Middle Eastern countries. We weren't exactly where the terrorists were, whatever. We're still in the Middle East today, 19 years later, using that same authorization for use of military force.
Mm-hmm.
Trump used it to bomb in the Middle East. Obama used it to bomb in the Middle East. So there's fault on both parties here, and I don't want to clear the Democrats' name in that sense. And I think one way to identify that today, even though they're taking a more welcoming stance, is exactly what you brought up, having no Muslim voices at the DNC.
No, they did not. And here's the other thing. You guys, the Muslim family is a huge voting bloc, locally and statewide, in different battleground states. So, I mean, who is your voice? Who is currently now the voice for the Muslim community to bring either forward to the Biden campaign? Because obviously the Muslim community is not too much in favor of the Donald Trump administration. They're looking towards a Biden for some type of relief here. Who is the voice in the Muslim community to address these issues? Because you guys are a voting bloc. It's a fact that you guys are growing in numbers and in key battleground states.
A personal project of mine that I hope to do at some point is work in the Northeast for voter registration, but especially these heavy immigrant populations. There are so many, and it's not just South Asian immigrants like myself. There is such a heavy population in the Northeast that could swing elections that just aren't registered. Something my dad's noticed his whole life. My dad works for the city of Philadelphia. He's a traffic engineer, and he's been here since, like, I think he celebrated like 30 years or something recently at the city, and he's seen this his whole time living in Bustleton. My mom's noticed it. It's just you're spot on. There are very big blocks and growing blocks. I mean, you look at the election of Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, where there's a heavy Somali refugee population, which helped in her election, I would assume, and stuff like that. But we don't really have too many voices at the national stage, as you've identified. The people that are working for Joe Biden right now have done a decent job of reaching out. I've had people reach out to me from like the Pennsylvania director for Joe Biden about like Muslims for Biden and stuff like that. I think we're getting grouped into, usually when you see, at least, and this is from my very little experience, so please correct me because I don't know too much about this. What I've seen from the Biden campaign to target voters hasn't been a religious based approach, but rather an ethnicity based approach, meaning I'm grouped into like South Asians for Biden versus Muslims for Biden, if that makes sense. And obviously there's Muslims outside of South Asia, which would be like Pakistan or whatever. But it seems to me that the Biden campaign is taking demographics into a more of a regional light. And I've seen really good work, especially in Texas right now, which could be purple or could be a swing state. I don't expect it to go blue, but some polling suggests it's a possibility. They've done fantastic work in recruiting immigrants and minorities through young adults. Like I have a link. One of my friends is currently working in Texas for Biden, for South Asians for Biden, and they're working with like a Kennedy School public policy kid is right now running the whole operation, and they're working in Texas to get people registered to vote and give them a voice. So I think the Biden campaign's done a good job. In that, I don't think they're targeting us by religion, but rather by ethnicity. But to your point, no matter how much we register or vote for Joe Biden, we still don't have a distinct voice.
Do you still feel you're being tokenized, either by the Democratic Party or Republican Party as a Muslim community? Do you think you're making progress of not being tokenized currently?
Yeah. So this is where I get I have my own takes on this. I am a believer in you have to play the game to change the system, which is interesting. I can delve into that a bit more. I definitely do think the Muslim community has been tokenized, especially when you have a neoliberal base of the Democratic Party. And I'm not here to call out specific political ideologies, but I think as a Muslim, you see certain political ideologies that were heavy in going into the Middle East. Like the Obama administration should be criticized, at least in my opinion, for the sole amount of drone strikes and bombs and stuff that went into the Middle East. Like, I never went back to, like, Pakistan is in the Middle East, but just the destabilization of the region and that connecting flights usually go through the Middle East. I never went back to Pakistan until last year for the first time ever in my life. My parents grew up there for 20, 30, 40. Like, my uncle lives there. I have cousins there. It's a very, very important part of my identity, as I'm the first generation in my family to be born in the United States. But I wasn't able to go back until last year, just because of how destabilized the region and the region around it is. So I think right now, if I had to say that the Democrats are tokenizing us, I would say yes. Just because I'm worried about how the Biden administration suits up when it comes to Middle Eastern intervention, or when you have guys like Mike Bloomberg on the debate stage, who's a moderate, but he was in favor of, and he wasn't just in favor, he did this, he literally spied on mosques. And they used like the Patriot Act that was passed to curb our civil liberties, and mosques were being spied on, and that's a supposed moderate Democrat, right? So I think there are issues within the party.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, under President Barack Obama, we have to say this, he was considered to be the peace president. And yet Obama bombed 7 countries in 6 years. We're talking about 7 countries in 6 years. And that was the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Syria. That's hard stuff to swallow. That's a hard pill to swallow.
And most people don't realize that how many drone strikes that he did during his administration.
Yeah.
Because you didn't hear about it. But you're right, and you're right to comment on that, Reza, because I think most people don't realize that. People are like, oh, we weren't really at war under Obama, but we were bombing with
The Mo-
drones
yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and he did it within 6 years of being in office. The justification for that, I don't know if there's any justification for that.
2001 authorization for use of military force. I know he used it for Libya. I'm assuming he like because obviously if we can go into the constitutional backing, but like
Mm-hmm.
you need Congress's authorization, right?
Yeah.
Unless he's declaring like wartime powers, which he wasn't, or taking back commander in chief status, but we haven't seen that. So my understanding of it is that you need authorization from Congress, and that authorization for use of military force, AUMF from 2001, cites any allies of Al Qaeda, if I have my language correctly here.
Yeah.
It's been abused to be like, oh, because if you can link any terror group to Al Qaeda, or not even Al Qaeda, but just the perpetrators of 9/11 per se,
Mm-hmm.
if you can do that based on that AUMF, you can bomb whoever you want.
Yeah.
And that's still there. And it's only been the Democrats never brought it up. It was only until you have certain progressives, and not even progressive, but like people further left, that started saying like, hey, like this is bad. We should probably get rid of this.
Yeah, but it was excessive. 390 strikes of drones in 5 years, 8 times more than what President Bush had done. It's, I don't know. The humanitarian part of it is where I'm more sensible to. People, if civilians were killed, innocent people were killed in this process.
Now, Rez, I want to spend the last few minutes. I want to hear about your experience with Erin last year during her campaign. I really liked Erin Santamore. I was a Republican, but I was rooting for her on the Democratic side. And it's interesting. I saw Erin as a moderate, but sometimes you don't know exactly where people fall until they get into office. I thought Jamie Gutierrez was more of a moderate, but she's proven to be much more progressive than I saw her as. And I know Jamie. Jamie's a friend of mine. But what drew you to Erin? Was it were you just trying to get involved in a campaign and you didn't really get to know Erin until you were there? Did you know Erin or get to know her policies prior to, and that's why you wanted to work on her campaign?
I think it was a mix of both.
Mm-hmm.
There was a good link that was through the High School Democrats of America that I don't know if you know Caroline. She was the fundraising director. And she had a link with the High School Democrats, and they put us in touch, and I reached out. But at the same time, the campaign was exactly what I was looking for, and I looked into some of the policies, and I think that for as progressive or further on the left that I am, I do think there's a need in city government right now to be a little bit more pragmatic and understanding the funding aspects.
Sure.
And I think Erin brings the best of both, where she has like the progressive mindset that I was looking for, but at the same time has experience in government work to actually get stuff done.
Sure. Yeah, and she worked under Mayor Nutter, and then she was the most experienced of the challengers.
Yeah.
And there were and that's 30 people who are running, I think, as Democrats for city council last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely heard pragmatism was a big standout to me, just because I know how ineffective city government is, especially in Philadelphia. And it ended up being like, that was one of the coolest experiences of my life, just getting to work on that camp and learning the ins and outs of campaign work, logging data on NGP when my computer would crash because it was my school Chrome, like stuff like that was just a really good experience for me. I met a lot of good people, and Erin just as a person has been really like important just to me, and like through my high school stuff. Like I wouldn't hesitate to call her if I was like struggling with something going on at home, and we just talk it out.
Yeah, no, Erin was. I got to know her pretty well during the campaign, but no, I mean she just comes across as a very nice person, and we always got along. I mean, I made a lot of friends over the campaign, many of which who were Democrats, because there were so many Democrats who
There's
ran
a
for
lot
city
of
council. There was, I think it was 30 by the end. It was insane. So Aaron really stood out to me as an incredibly intelligent person, and a very nice person, and absolutely the one with, put the most work in, to be honest with you. I mean, she had a plan. She had a staff. She raised a ton of money, which is extremely challenging on a municipal level. But, she really impressed me in the short amount of time that we were kind of on the campaign trail together.
No, it was definitely. I was very lucky to be put in such a well-run campaign because I got to see how everything should be done.
Yeah.
Whether it be from the fundraising, like you said, and the countless calls or whatever we did, and just the setup we had of like binders for certain things, and like just the ins and outs of like what made a good campaign run, to just like staffing random events and like just hanging out because we staffed an event and we're like, hey, welcome to the event. Like, here's some material about Aaron. Hope you enjoy stuff like that. It was just definitely an experience I won't forget, and it's something that I think was one of the big what's the word? I guess changes, we'll say, when I'm looking into my future in my career. I'm don't think I'd ever be a person to run for office like yourself or Aaron.
I was just about to ask you that question. Is your political future in running for office, or is it?
I don't think I'm an office person.
Mhm.
I definitely. So right now, I'm trying to build my undergraduate studies towards a public policy major, but public policy doesn't really exist at the undergraduate level too much. Erin will tell you differently because she did policy analysis at Cornell,
Mm-hmm.
but at least my understanding is my end goal, if you will, is to leverage something we hear a lot in business, which is behavioral economics, and behavioral science. But I want to leverage that in a public policy light to design more effective policy, I think, because traditional economics assumes too much about consumer behavior and consumer decision making, and a lot of it is rooted in rationality, and like as humans we always make the rational decision is supposed to be the idea, but I think we can all agree that humans make stupid decisions sometimes, or they might just not be considered traditionally rational. So, and this is a huge tangent, but my goal essentially is to leverage psychology, economics, and behavioral science into writing and designing new types of policy in the future.
Let's see. You're going to graduate in 2024, theoretically from
Hopefully.
undergrad, and maybe go to grad school. And I don't know where I'll be, Reza, but I'll hire you, Reza. You can come work for. If you could,
I don't know if
could you work for a Republican?
You might have. I'm trying to get like Medicare for all done. Drew.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know if you'll be on board with that, but
I am not for any single payer system run by the government, and the only reason I am against it is because the government is not good at running anything, and I don't want them
Uh-oh.
running
okay.
healthcare. But I am for affordable healthcare for all. And in a perfect world, I would be fine with single payer system that isn't run by the government. But I don't know how that could happen. I like Obamacare, actually, and that's coming from a Republican standpoint. I think it's a step in the right direction. It definitely has flaws, but healthcare is unaffordable for too many people, and healthcare should not be determined by your zip code. And so we need to do better there. But yeah, I mean, we could probably talk about that for hours. But yeah, I'm probably closer than you think in agreeing with you on Medicare for all. I just don't think the government's good at running anything. So.
Well, when
So I can still hire
when
you,
the
Reza.
government interferes, it's a problem.
It is always a problem, and that's a problem with single payer healthcare systems. But I'll hire you, Reza. You can work for if you can just kind of get your feet wet working for a Republican.
I'll
And,
give you my moderate policies first.
That's right. Hey, I look, I am a moderate. I think I'll be honest with you. I heard a stat the other day to kind of go off on a tangent a little bit, but 40% of the people consider themselves moderates and don't necessarily identify with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So if you think about that, there are probably more people in the middle
Yeah.
than there are on each side.
Yeah.
So,
That's fine.
and I think we need more moderates. I mean, even if it's just so we can get the people on the far left and the far right to speak to each other and not yell at each other and actually pass legislation. That would be my thought as far as why we need more moderates. Like, and of course, like me, I'm running for office, so I think we need more moderates like me.
Yeah. No, that's completely, I think that's my one concern about pushing further left. Um, and I won't hold like I consider myself along the lines of democratic socialism right now. It might go further left, it might come back middle, I don't know. But one of my critiques or one of my worries, and I'm not sure how founded this claim is, but yeah, like to pass policy in a hyper partisan Congress, you have to be somewhat bipartisan unless you win the Senate or you have the House or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said for no matter how, and I don't like equating the far left and the far right. Um, there's definitely issues on the far left, but far right militia group, like there's when we classify, like if we're considering like Bernie Sanders far left, like this is a guy who wants free healthcare versus someone on the far right is like neo-fascist. Like there's but I understand claims about far right militias or like far left militias or far left violence. Sure, like that exists. I don't think it's as prevalent as we make it out to be, but that's I won't go off too much on that.
Sure.
But I think there is something to be said for no matter how far wide you are on the spectrum, you have to understand that unless you have a majority, which is rare at times because party lines won't always agree with you, you have to work with both sides. And I think that's what I've been trying to do as someone who will describe themselves to be further on the left. But we have to understand you're not going to get anything done, right? Like that's the beauty of Erin Sandmore's campaign, at least in my opinion, is that she might be more progressive, but she realizes to get stuff done, you need people on your side, and you can't just yell at them the whole time, right? You have to work together.
Sure.
So I
Absolutely.
can buck on that.
So we're coming up to the end. We're gonna have to. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer, Reza, but so we're gonna have to have you back on. But I want to thank you, Reza, for coming
Yeah.
on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you, Leslie, for
And thank you,
for
Reza.
coming on as well.
Thank
know,
you
Leslie's
for-
been helping me because I'm in the middle of a campaign, and
That's
I
okay.
feel like I barely have time for anything. So that's why Leslie's been helping me out. And so thank you again. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Reza. This is
Thank
the
you.
Republican Zone on Usula Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.